happening tonight in Vancouver.
Getting COVID shots in BC now a family affair.
If you have a parent or a guardian who has an appointment booked for tomorrow and you're 12 to 17, you can go with them.
And just a day after being allowed to register, youth can also book their own shots.
Well, the Victoria Day long weekend is upon us, and while it could be tempting to get out of town, you're being asked to think twice. Coming up, what leaders across the province are urging you to do over the next few days as our fight against COVID-19 continues.
Sounds of celebrations in the streets as a ceasefire comes into effect between Israel and Hamas.
This is City News Everywhere.
Good evening. There are 357 new cases of COVID-19 across the province tonight, and 3 more people have died in the last day. There are 331 people currently in hospital. That's down from 9 from yesterday, and 113 people are in the ICU. BC's new roadmap to recovery from COVID-19 will be revealed on Tuesday.
Kids in BC can now take shots with their parents, their COVID-19 vaccination shots.
If you have a parent or a guardian who has an appointment booked for tomorrow and you're 12 to 17, you can go with them.
Youth can also book their own shots without parental permission. The goal is to make it as easy as possible for entire families to get vaccinated. This is why the province says they're relying on these community clinics that are already in place instead of bringing clinics into schools.
It takes a lot of resources to go into every single school in a very short period of time, and that would not have been able to be done equitably across especially some of our larger health authorities.
Teachers were pushing for school clinics, concerned for kids and families more challenged than others to access information, transportation, and time to get doses.
Including language barriers and all sorts of other barriers. And it's not necessarily about vaccine hesitancy. It's about the ability to access the vaccines. So we want to make sure that there are as few barriers as possible.
Outside of school, it's hoped these youth vaccinations will take down the barriers to kids doing extracurriculars like they used to.
Once this demographic gets 1 dose of vaccine, it's going to be somewhat indefensible not to allow them to get back to playing sports, especially outdoors.
And also playing competitive games that have been on hold for so long. There's been some concern these about 300,000 youth in BC being in line for vaccinations now might alter the province's timeline for second doses.
This will not delay the moving up of second doses for people who are most at risk, which are elderly in our communities who have not yet received their second dose, for people who are clinically extremely vulnerable.
With so much supply now, second doses in BC have moved up from 16 weeks to 13. As for what will encourage youth who are at least risk from this virus to get this vaccine, Dr. Henry says they've been some of the most affected by the restrictions, and this is a way out.
It really is about missing out on life and wanting to get that back.
For City News in Victoria, I'm News 1130's Lisa Yuzda.
It's an honor for me to return to the agency. This organization has momentum. We are very much in the big lift.
The new head of Canada's vaccine logistics introduces herself.
The border between Canada and the United States will remain closed for at least another 30 days. The ban on non-essential ground travel has been extended until June 21st in an ongoing attempt to slow the spread of COVID-19. With infection numbers falling on both sides of the border, talks recently got underway about what an eventual reopening could look like, but no target date has been set just yet.
I urge all British Columbians to recognize that we do have public health orders in place until Monday evening at midnight.
Well, the May long weekend is usually the unofficial start of summer, where we might hit the highway and head out to the interior, or hop on a ferry to enjoy some time on the island. But that has all changed amid the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic. BC's leaders are once again pleading with people to stay close to home.
Whenever there's been a long weekend, we've seen an increase in case counts, which leads to an increase in potential fatalities.
Premier John Horgan is asking people not to leave town and to stay within their own health authority.
There are public health orders in place. There are travel restrictions in place, not to the beginning of the long weekend, but to the end of the long weekend.
Checkpoints are still in place along 4 BC highways, and that means people will still be asked whether their travel is for essential purposes. This is also the case if you're planning to catch a ferry.
We've had very few cases of customers being denied travel for non-essential reasons. And to be honest, for the most part, it was either they weren't aware of the travel restrictions order or a lack of understanding of the details.
Sue McCordoff is the mayor of Vesuvius, and she believes there will be people who show up for a long weekend visit despite pleas to stay local.
We are assuming that some of them will not abide by what has been said, that the non-essential travel. And so we just hope that if there are people coming here, and I totally understand they pay taxes and they own property, we expect them to abide by the same rules and regulations that all of us do.
McCordoff is asking people to be respectful and also to remember who is responsible for enforcing the rules.
And when people phone me and say, so-and-so's here in town, we want you to go out and tell them that they have to leave, I can't do that. Enforcement is the role of the provincial government.
Ultimately, she's encouraging people to get creative close to home.
I just hope everybody has a good long weekend and does some really interesting things in their own little neck of the woods.
The Premier expects to unveil his restart plan on Tuesday. In Burnaby, Ria Renouf, City News.
I often would say, I can't wait to just deal with COVID only.
On the same day the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic, a Vancouver woman was starting her first chemotherapy treatment. Just ahead, her experience tackling a cancer diagnosis in the midst of a global pandemic. Burnaby RCMP are asking for the public's help as they try and track down a man wanted in connection with a violent assault. And it was all caught on surveillance camera. It happened over the noon hour on Saturday, May 8th at a store on 1st Avenue just off Boundary Road. Police say an employee walked up to the man in the store and asked him why he wasn't wearing a mask. The man punched the worker in the head and back, and when another employee tried to intervene, the man threatened to kill them with a knife. Before he left, the man grabbed a pair of bolt cutters and smashed the front window of the business.
If you don't have to approach a person, I mean, it's one thing to have a conversation, but if it escalates, get out of the situation. Make sure everyone knows that what's going on, and just back off. Let the person vent if they have to. Otherwise, people can get hurt.
Call police if you recognize the man or have any information. The man charged in last year's massive fire at Pier Park in New Westminster has died. 49-year-old Sean Warnick was arrested in October, just a few weeks after fire engulfed the riverfront green space. He was released with conditions but has since passed away, and police say details into his death won't be revealed. There are no additional suspects at this time. Strathcona Park's homeless encampment is mostly empty, but a few people have stuck around after the deadline. Vancouver police arrested 3 people this morning. Advocate Fiona York says there's at least a dozen still living on the outskirts of the park who haven't been connected with housing. And she says forcing them off the premises can actually make things worse.
It's really difficult again because it can mean that people are not kept all together, and it just is more difficult then to contact people. Again, people with not a lot of means for communication. People who don't have phones, don't have email, don't have a secure location where they can be found.
The city says at least 180 people were housed by the April 30th deadline. After a bit of a slow start, Canada's COVID-19 vaccination pace continues to accelerate, with more and more doses arriving in the country each week. This latest batch arriving this morning in Toronto from Moderna's European production facility. The 1.1 million doses on board will soon be distributed to the provinces and territories. At last check, just over 48% of Canadians had received at least one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. However, only 3.2% are fully vaccinated.
It's an honor for me to return to the agency. This organization has momentum. We are very much in the big lift.
The woman now in charge of Canada's vaccine logistics speaks for the first time. While the soldier in charge of shipping vaccines in Canada has changed, the message from the top hasn't. The vaccine rollout is going well and is only getting better.
We are increasingly seeing high volume vaccine supply with a record number of vaccine deliveries this week. The National Operations Centre is humming along like a well-oiled machine.
But Brody couldn't explain why Canada is now expecting around 40 million vaccines before the end of June, far less than what the Prime Minister promised last month. Here's Justin Trudeau on April 27th.
Canada is positioned to receive close to 50 million doses of vaccine before the end of June.
Here's Major General Danny Fortin on May 6th.
So at the end of the second quarter, we will have received more than 40 million doses.
And here's what public health says now.
So from a distribution perspective, we can confirm up to 40 million doses by the end of June.
Procurement says some of this can be chalked up to problems with Moderna's scheduling, but couldn't provide greater detail.
We will be able to provide further detail once we have a better confirmation of their delivery capacity on a weekly basis.
Meanwhile, there's an emerging timeline for guidance on mixing vaccine doses. Dr. Howard New says NACI is waiting on studies from the UK and US, but expects to announce something in a few weeks.
We're tracking for NACI to maybe give a recommendation or guidance with respect to the mix and matching, probably sort of early June, first week or so.
In Ottawa, Shaoli Lee, City News.
Canada's ramped-up COVID-19 vaccination rollout is now among the top 15 in the world. That's a marked change from the 42nd place it held in early March. As of this morning, Canada had given at least one dose to 18.1 million people. That's just under 48% of the population, tying even with the U.S. But any celebration of achievement is muted for some health professionals who see Canada pulling ahead at the expense of much of the world, especially poorer and developing nations. The streets in Gaza beginning to fill up as people celebrate the ceasefire coming down at 2 a.m. local time between Israel and Hamas. U.S. President Joe Biden weighing in just before, saying he had talked to both Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu and the President of Egypt as they brokered the deal.
In my conversation with President Netanyahu, I commended him for the decision to bring the current hostilities to a close within less than 11 days. I also emphasized what I've said throughout this conflict. The United States fully supports Israel's right to defend itself against indiscriminate rocket attacks from Hamas and other Gaza-based terrorist groups that have taken the lives of innocent civilians in Israel.
The conflict has killed at least 12 people in Israel, including 2 children, and some 230 people in Gaza, where more than 60 children are among the dead. More than 50,000 Palestinians have been displaced since the latest conflict began. In an unprecedented move, an Ontario civil court has ruled that Iran committed an act of terrorism when it shot down Ukraine Airlines Flight 752. The plane was shot just moments after taking off from Tehran in January 2020. 85 Canadians and permanent residents were among the 176 people killed. Today's ruling is on a suit filed by victims' families. Iran did not defend itself in court. The families' lawyers say the next step is compensation. Canada also working with the home countries of other victims on an international resolution.
COVID shut the world down, but COVID and cancer shut my world down.
When the world was first trying to figure out how to adapt during a global pandemic more than a year ago, an East Vancouver woman was navigating a cancer diagnosis.
Literally, the world collapsed around me as my own life collapsed around me.
Penny Acton was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer last February. She started chemotherapy on March 11th, 2020, the same day the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic.
At the moment, I was like, what does that pandemic even mean? Like, what do you mean I'm getting chemo right now? How does that affect me moving forward?
At a time when many people were feeling isolated, Acton was undergoing chemotherapy, radiation, and multiple surgeries on her own.
It's basically almost a full-time job being a cancer patient, because you're going to appointments, you're going to treatments, and you're waiting, for the next appointment time. And my husband, unfortunately, wasn't able to go to any of the appointments with me because of COVID. So I basically was on my own.
And while others were socially distancing, Acton says her world was in its own bubble.
We were just so isolated in this little bubble, afraid of every germ that may walk through the door. So it was really scary and isolating and extremely stressful.
14 months later, she's recovered and has returned to her job as a social worker at a hospital in the Lower Mainland.
I had a really good response to the chemo, the surgery, and then pathology said that, things were gone. And they did, the radiation to make sure it was gone. And so, yeah, I think it's as close as to be as cancer-free.
It's an experience that's changed her perspective on life.
I have this constant joy and appreciation that I feel and I'm aware of, and I definitely never had that pre-COVID cancer.
Miranda Fatour, City News.
The Canucks cleaned out their lockers Thursday after a season that players described as grueling, a grind, taxing, and stressful. The team-wide COVID-19 outbreak derailed a squad that had already fallen behind in the standings and wound up in last place in the North Division. But it appears head coach Travis Green is going to get another chance with the Canucks, as rumors surfaced Thursday that Green will sign an extension with the team, something that his players would welcome.
In terms of the job that Greener and the coaches have done, I think it's been awesome. We look at when he first came in here, we were kind of going through a big CityNews. It's kind of after, the CityNews retired, and it's a kind of organizational change. And I knew even when I came here, we were going to go through something like that. And then a couple of years later, Greener came in and we kind of started to turn the page a bit and look at then I think 2 years ago, even last season, just felt like we were kind of, finding our way a bit. And you could feel it last season in the building. You could feel it with the fans and just the energy we had last year. It was a fun year, and that's all because of our, coaching staff.
Travis has been awesome towards not only the team, but towards me, helping me through, this process and growing my game and teaching me how to play the right way and trying to be a good leader. So he's been great towards me and he's been great with the team. So, we'd like to see him back for sure.
Again, this season doesn't fall on them. It falls on everybody, and players and staff included. But I know I personally sure enjoyed everything they did for me and for the guys here. And I'm not going to comment too much more on it, but there's no question that the feeling of a lot of people, I think, is we like our staff here.
Some breaking news now. Emergency services were called to the Langley airport just before 5 p.m. tonight for a report of a helicopter that had crashed. It was later determined that a helicopter carrying a pilot and one passenger had crashed shortly after takeoff. The pilot and passenger were able to walk away and are not seriously hurt. Vancouver's news is always available on the radio with News 1130 or online anytime at citynews1130.com. Your next edition of City News is tonight at 11. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.